The invasion began without warning. One moment, the skies over New York City were clear and calm, filled with the hum of daily life. The next, massive alien ships descended like storm clouds, blotting out the sun. Their sleek metallic surfaces shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and their presence sent waves of fear rippling through the crowded streets below. People screamed and ran in every direction as beams of energy tore through buildings, reducing them to rubble. It was chaos. Pure, unrelenting chaos. Clara Bennett stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been on her way to a meeting at the United Nations headquarters when the attack started. Now, the once bustling city around her was collapsing into ruin. Smoke filled the air, and the sharp smell of burning metal stung her nose. Shaking herself out of her shock, Clara grabbed her bag and ducked into a nearby alley, trying to find cover. Her mind raced. As one of Earth's top astrophysicists, she knew more than most about the possibility of extraterrestrial life, but nothing could have prepared her for this. The aliens called themselves the Krylos Dominion, though no one had time to learn much about them before the destruction began. They were tall, with elongated limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Their eyes glowed faintly, scanning the terrified humans they captured. Clara watched from her hiding spot as several Krylos soldiers marched down the street, dragging people out of their homes and forcing them onto hovering transport ships. She clenched her fists tightly, fighting back tears. She couldn't let herself fall apart. Not now. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed nearby. A piece of debris from a collapsing building landed just feet away from her, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Clara stumbled backward, dropping her bag. Before she could pick it up, a shadow loomed over her. She looked up to see two Krylos soldiers standing there, their weapons trained on her. For a moment, she considered running, but she knew it was useless. These creatures were faster and stronger than any human. Instead, she raised her hand slowly, showing that she meant no harm. One of the soldiers barked something in a language she didn't understand, his voice harsh and guttural. The other stepped forward and grabbed her arm, pulling her roughly to her feet. Clara winced but said nothing. She glanced around, hoping to see anyone, who might help her, but the streets were deserted except for the Krylos troops and their captives. As they dragged her toward one of the transport ships, she caught sight of a child's doll lying abandoned in the dirt. Something inside her broke, but she forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help anyone. Once aboard the ship, Clara was shoved into a small, dimly lit holding area with other prisoners. Most of them sat silently, their faces pale with fear. A few sobbed quietly, clutching each other for comfort. Clara found a corner and slid down to the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Despite everything, her mind kept working, analyzing the situation. Who were these aliens? What did they want? And why had they chosen Earth? Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Clara lost track of time. Finally, the ship came to a stop, and the prisoners were herded off. Clara blinked against the bright light as she stepped outside, finding herself on what appeared to be another planet entirely. Towering structures made of black stone stretched toward the sky, and strange, glowing plants lined the streets. In the distance, a massive palace loomed, its spires piercing the clouds. This, she realized, was where the Krylos ruled their empire. As she was led inside the palace, Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know what awaited her, but she vowed to face it head-on. Whatever happened next, she would not give up, not without a fight. Clara's first glimpse of the Krylos Emperor came as she was pushed into a vast, echoing chamber. The room was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its walls shimmered with veins of glowing crystal, and the air carried a faint hum, like the sound of distant machinery. At the far end of the chamber stood a towering figure clad in ornate armor that seemed to shift colors under the light. This was Zorath Aex, ruler of the Krylos Dominion. His presence filled the room, commanding attention and fear. Two guards forced Clara to her knees before him, but she refused to bow her head. Instead, she looked directly at Zoreth, meeting his glowing eyes with a steady gaze. For a moment, there was silence. Then Zoreth stepped forward, his movements deliberate and slow. He studied her with an intensity that made her skin crawl, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now, not here. "You are Clara Bennett," Zoreth said, his voice deep and resonant, each word carrying a strange melodic undertone. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded once, keeping her expression neutral. "You are known among your kind as a scientist of great skill. Your knowledge will serve the Dominion well." Clara's stomach churned at the thought of helping the very beings who had destroyed her home, but she kept her voice calm when she spoke. "I won't help you," she said firmly. Her words echoed slightly in the chamber, and for a brief second, she saw something flicker in Zoreth's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation. But it was gone almost instantly. Zoreth tilted his head, studying her as if she were a puzzle he needed to solve. "Your defiance is curious," he said after a pause. "Most of your kind break easily under pressure, yet you stand before me, unyielding." He took another step closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. "Do you not understand your position? You are nothing more than a prisoner. Your world has fallen. Your people are scattered, and yet you dare to resist." Clara swallowed hard, her throat dry, but she didn't look away. "My world may have fallen," she replied, her voice quieter now but still strong. "But we're not defeated. As long as even one of us fights back, you'll never truly win." For a moment, Zoreth said nothing. Then he let out a low, rumbling laugh that sent shivers down Clara's spine. "Fascinating," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Perhaps there is more to humanity than I assumed." He turned to one of his advisors, a slender Krylos with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. "Prepare her quarters. She will begin work immediately." The guards hauled Clara to her feet and led her out of the chamber. As they walked, she tried to take in as much of her surroundings as possible. The palace was enormous, its halls lined with intricate carvings and glowing symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Strange creatures scurried about, some humanoid, others entirely alien. Everywhere she looked, there were signs of the Krylos' advanced technology, devices that floated midair, doors that opened without being touched, lights that adjusted to movement. Eventually, Clara was brought to a small but functional room. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean and equipped with what appeared to be scientific instruments. A table in the center held stacks of data tablets and tools she didn't recognize. One of the guards gestured toward the table. "Work," he growled, his voice guttural and harsh. Clara approached the table cautiously, examining the items. Whatever project they wanted her to work on, it was clearly important to them. Her mind raced as she considered her options. If she outright refused to cooperate, they might harm her, or worse, use her as leverage against Earth. But if she pretended to help while secretly sabotaging their efforts, she might buy time for humanity to regroup. It was a risky plan, but it was all she had. As the hours passed, Clara focused on the tasks assigned to her, carefully planting subtle errors in her calculations and designs. She knew she couldn't make her sabotage too obvious. The Krylos were intelligent, and any mistake could cost her dearly. But she also knew she had to try. Every delay, every misstep, gave Earth a little more time to fight back. Late into the night, as the palace grew quiet, Clara sat alone in her room, staring at the glowing symbols on the walls. She thought about her family, her friends, everyone she had left behind on Earth. Were they safe? Were they fighting? She didn't know. All she could do was hope, and keep resisting, no matter how impossible things seemed. Back on Earth, the remnants of humanity were scattered and broken, but not defeated. In a hidden underground bunker deep in the mountains of Colorado, Daniel Carter paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. The invasion had left him with a burning sense of guilt. He had been part of the team responsible for evacuating key scientists before the Krylos arrived, and Clara Bennett's capture weighed heavily on his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done more to protect her. The bunker was alive with activity. Survivors moved quickly between workstations, repairing equipment, analyzing data, and planning their next moves. At the center of it all was Rachel Monroe, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. She sat at a cluttered desk, typing furiously on a laptop while muttering to herself. Papers and maps were spread out around her, along with half-empty cups of coffee. When Daniel approached, she barely looked up. "Anything new?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. Rachel sighed and leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "Not much," she admitted. "We've picked up some chatter from the Krylos fleet, but it's all encrypted. Without Clara, we don't have anyone who can crack it." Daniel frowned, his jaw tightening. "We can't just sit here and do nothing. We need to find a way to get her back." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you propose we do that? Their home planet is light years away, and we don't even know where they're holding her." "I don't care how far it is or how hard it is," Daniel snapped. "She's one of us. If we leave her there, we might as well give up completely." Rachel studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fine. But we'll need a plan, and resources we don't have right now. First, we need to figure out what they want with her. That might give us a clue about where to start." Over the next few days, Daniel threw himself into gathering information. He reached out to other resistance cells, piecing together fragments of intelligence about the Krylos movements. Word spread among survivors that the aliens were searching for something important enough to justify the destruction they had wrought. Some believed it was Earth's technology. Others thought it was its resources, but Daniel suspected it was something else entirely: knowledge. One evening, as he sifted through intercepted transmissions, he stumbled across a faint signal, a distorted message that seemed to come from within the Krylos Empire itself. It was garbled and incomplete, but one word stood out: Clara *. His heart raced as he played it back again and again, trying to make sense of it. Could it be her? Was she trying to send them a message? He brought the recording to Rachel, who listened intently. Her expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. "This could be real," she said finally. "If she's sending this, it means she's still fighting. And if she's fighting, we owe it to her to do the same." With renewed determination, the two began working on a daring idea. They knew they couldn't take on the Krylos head-on, not yet. But if they could find a weakness in the Empire's defenses, they might stand a chance. Rachel suggested focusing on Mars, where old human colonies had once thrived. Rumors hinted that the Krylos had established a secret facility there, possibly linked to whatever they were planning next. "We hit them where it hurts," Rachel said, spreading a map of the solar system across the table. "If we can infiltrate that base, we might find something we can use against them. Maybe even a way to bring Clara home." Daniel nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's get to work." As the days turned into weeks, the Resistance prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. Supplies were gathered, weapons were repaired, and volunteers stepped forward despite the risks. For Daniel, every step felt like a race against time. He didn't know what awaited them on Mars, or whether Clara was still alive, but he refused to give up. Not while there was still breath in his body and fire in his heart. Clara's days blurred together as she worked under the watchful eyes of her Krylos captors. The palace was a maze of cold, alien corridors and sterile laboratories, but she had begun to notice patterns in the routines of those around her. Most of the Krylos soldiers followed orders without question, their movements precise and mechanical. But there was one advisor who stood out: Varric. He was tall and lean, with angular features that made him look almost fragile compared to the others. His glowing eyes, however, were sharp and calculating, always observing. At first, Clara avoided drawing his attention. She didn't trust him, or anyone else in the palace. But over time, she noticed how often he lingered near her workstation. Sometimes he would ask questions about her progress, his tone polite but probing. Other times, he simply watched her, his expression unreadable. It was unsettling, but Clara decided to use it to her advantage. One evening, after most of the guards had left the lab, Varric approached her again. "You work tirelessly," he said, his voice smooth and measured. "Yet I sense hesitation in your efforts." Clara kept her hands busy, adjusting a piece of equipment on the table. "I don't know what you mean," she replied casually. "I'm doing exactly what your emperor asked." Varric tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You are clever, Clara Bennett. Clever enough to know when something is wrong. Tell me, what do you think of our empire?" The question caught her off guard. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's powerful," she admitted. "But power doesn't always mean justice." A flicker of something crossed Varric's face, surprise or maybe unease. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "Justice," he repeated softly, as if testing the word. "An interesting concept. One we rarely discuss here." Clara's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "Why not? Don't you believe in doing what's right?" Varric straightened, his gaze distant for a moment. "What is right?" he murmured. "For centuries, the Dominion has expanded its reach, conquering worlds in the name of survival. But at what cost? Our people grow uneasy. Some even whisper of rebellion." Clara's pulse quickened. Was he trying to tell her something, or trap her? She decided to take a risk. "If your people are unhappy, why don't they speak up? Why let Zorath keep ruling this way?" Varric's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't move away. "Change is dangerous," he said, "and fear is a powerful tool. Many are too afraid to act." "But not you." Clara pressed gently. He hesitated, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "I serve the Empire because it is my duty. But duty does not blind me to its flaws." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara took a deep breath. Maybe it's time someone did something about those flaws. Varric stared at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Perhaps," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But such actions require trust and courage." As he turned to leave, Clara felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She didn't fully trust Varric, but his words hinted at doubt, and doubt could be exploited. Over the next few days, she began engaging him in quiet conversations whenever they were alone. She shared stories of Earth, painting a picture of a world where freedom and cooperation mattered more than conquest. Slowly, she saw cracks forming in his rigid demeanor. Meanwhile, her sabotage continued. Each miscalculation, each deliberate error in her work, bought precious time for humanity. But Clara knew she couldn't keep it up forever. Sooner or later, the Krylos would realize what she was doing. And when that happened, she would need allies, no matter how unlikely they might seem. One night, as she lay awake in her quarters, Clara thought about Daniel and the others back on Earth. Were they still fighting? Did they have a plan to rescue her? She didn't know. All she could do was hold on to the belief that help was coming, and that she could weaken the Empire from within until it arrived. The journey to Mars was long and tense. Daniel Carter sat strapped into his seat aboard the makeshift spacecraft, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. Beside him, Rachel Monroe worked tirelessly at her console, running final checks on their systems. The small crew consisted of volunteers from the Resistance, men and women who had lost everything but still clung to the hope of fighting back. For Daniel, this mission was more than just a chance to strike at the Krylos. It was a chance to bring Clara home. As they approached the red planet, the outlines of the secret Krylos facility came into view. It was hidden in a deep canyon, its blackened structures blending seamlessly with the rocky terrain. Surveillance drones patrolled the perimeter, their glowing sensors scanning for intruders. Rachel pointed to the screen showing their destination. "This is it," she said quietly. "If there's anything useful here, we'll find it inside." The team landed several miles away, using the natural landscape to conceal their ship. They moved cautiously through the jagged cliffs, clad in camouflage suits that helped them blend into the dusty environment. Every step felt like walking a tightrope. Any wrong move could alert the Krylos guards. Daniel led the group, his rifle slung over his shoulder and his eyes scanning the horizon. He knew they were outnumbered and outgunned, but he also knew they couldn't afford to fail. After hours of careful maneuvering, they reached the edge of the canyon. From their vantage point, they could see the entrance to the facility, a massive door guarded by 2 Krylos soldiers. Rachel pulled out a small device and began hacking into the security system. Her fingers flew over the controls as sweat dripped down her face. "Almost there," she muttered under her breath. Suddenly, one of the guards turned toward their position, his head tilting slightly as if sensing something. Daniel froze, signaling for the others to stay still. The guard scanned the area for a moment before returning to his post. Everyone let out a quiet sigh of relief. A soft beep signaled that Rachel had successfully bypassed the lock. The heavy doors slid open just wide enough for the team to slip through unnoticed. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, filled with the hum of machinery. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they searched for clues about the Krylos plans. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon a room filled with data terminals. "This must be it," Rachel whispered, rushing to the nearest terminal. She plugged in her laptop and began downloading files. As lines of code scrolled across the screen, her expression grew darker. "They're building some kind of weapon," she said grimly. "Something designed to wipe out entire populations." Daniel clenched his fists. "We need to stop it." Before Rachel could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. A group of Krylos soldiers appeared, their weapons raised. There was no time to run. Daniel and his team opened fire, the sharp cracks of their guns filling the narrow space. Chaos erupted as the 2 sides clashed, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burnt metal. In the heat of the battle, Rachel managed to finish transferring the data. "Got it," she shouted, clutching the laptop to her chest. "Let's go." They fought their way back to the exit, every step feeling like an eternity. Just as they reached the surface, a massive explosion rocked the facility behind them. One of the team members had set charges to collapse the base, buying them time to escape. The ground shook violently as debris rained down around them. Back aboard their ship, the team regrouped, catching their breath. Rachel immediately began analyzing the stolen files, searching for a way to counteract the Krylos weapon. Daniel stared out the window at the burning ruins below, his thoughts turning to Clara. If they could use this information to weaken the Empire, maybe, just maybe, they'd have a chance to save her. For the first time in weeks, Daniel allowed himself a flicker of hope. The data stolen from the Krylos facility on Mars proved to be a treasure trove of information. Back in the hidden bunker, Rachel Monroe worked tirelessly to decipher the files, her fingers flying over the keyboard as lines of alien code scrolled across the screen. The team gathered around her, their faces tense with anticipation. Finally, after hours of analysis, Rachel leaned back in her chair, her expression grim but determined. "They're building something called the Oblivion Array," she explained, pointing to a schematic on the monitor. "It's a weapon designed to emit a pulse that disrupts life at a cellular level. If they deploy it, it could wipe out entire planets, including Earth." A heavy silence fell over the room. Daniel Carter clenched his fists, his jaw tight with anger. "We can't let that happen," he said firmly. "Is there any way to stop it?" Rachel hesitated before nodding. "There might be. The weapon isn't fully operational yet. They need a specific component to stabilize the energy output. It's called a core resonator, and according to these plans, they don't have it yet. If we can find or destroy it before they do, we can disable the array." "But where is it?" one of the team members asked. "That's the problem," Rachel admitted. "The files don't say. But I think Clara might know more. She's been working with their scientists. She'd have access to that kind of information." Daniel's resolve hardened. "Then we go get her. We can't do this without her." The idea of infiltrating Krylos Prime was daunting, But the team knew they had no other choice. Using the intelligence gathered from the Martian base, they began planning the mission. They would disguise themselves as Krylos officers, using stolen uniforms and forged credentials to blend in. It was risky, but it was their best shot. Meanwhile, on Krylos Prime, Clara Bennett continued her quiet rebellion. She had grown bolder in her conversations with Varric, testing his loyalty and planting seeds of doubt about Zoreth's rule. Though she still didn't fully trust him, she sensed that his dissatisfaction with the Empire ran deep. One evening, as they spoke in the dim light of her lab, Clara decided to take a greater risk. "Varric," she said softly, "if someone wanted to stop the Oblivion Array, how would they do it?" Varric stiffened, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Why do you ask such questions?" "I've seen the plans," Clara lied, keeping her tone calm. "I know what it's capable of. Do you really think destroying entire worlds is worth it? Is that the legacy you want to leave behind?" For a moment, Varric said nothing. Then he sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "The core resonator is the key," he admitted quietly. "Without it, the array cannot function. But it is heavily guarded. It resides in the Imperial vault beneath the palace." Clara filed the information away, careful not to show too much interest. "And if someone were to remove it, it would mean certain death," Varric replied, his voice tinged with warning. "But perhaps there are those who would see its destruction as a necessary sacrifice." Later that night, Clara managed to send a coded message to Earth using a device she had secretly built from spare parts. She included the details about the core resonator and its location, knowing it might be humanity's only chance to stop the weapon. As she transmitted the signal, her hands trembled, not from fear, but from hope. Help was coming. Back on Earth, Daniel intercepted the message and immediately began preparing for the rescue mission. He gathered a small team, including Rachel, and briefed them on the plan. They would pose as Krylos soldiers, infiltrate the palace, and extract Clara while locating the core resonator. It was a dangerous gamble, but failure wasn't an option. As the team boarded their ship and set course for Krylos Prime, Daniel felt a mix of dread and determination. He knew the odds were against them, but he also knew they couldn't give up. Not when so much was at stake. For Clara, for Earth, and for every human still fighting to survive, they would face whatever awaited them. And when the ship carrying Daniel Carter and his team emerged from hyperspace near Krylos Prime, its sleek design mimicking the appearance of a Krylos patrol vessel. The plan was simple in theory, but perilous in execution. Pose as Imperial officers, infiltrate the palace, retrieve Clara, and locate the core resonator, all without raising suspicion. As they approached the planet's atmosphere, Rachel adjusted her stolen uniform, ensuring every detail matched those worn by the Krylos soldiers. "Remember," she whispered, glancing at the others, "one wrong move, and we're dead." The landing went smoothly. Their forged credentials passed inspection at the spaceport, thanks to Rachel's meticulous hacking skills. Once inside the city, the group blended into the bustling streets filled with Krylos citizens and enslaved workers from conquered worlds. The towering spires of the Imperial Palace loomed ahead, their dark surfaces gleaming under the planet's pale sun. Daniel clenched his jaw as he led the way, trying to project confidence despite the weight of fear pressing on his chest. Inside the palace, the air was cool and heavy with an eerie silence. Guards patrolled the halls, their glowing eyes scanning for anything out of place. The team moved quickly, sticking close to the shadows whenever possible. Using a map Clara had secretly included in her message, they navigated toward the lab where she was being held. Along the way, they encountered several checkpoints, each requiring quick thinking and flawless acting to pass through. Finally, they reached the lab. Daniel signaled for the others to stay back while he peered inside. Clara was there, seated at a workstation, her face illuminated by the glow of a screen. She looked tired but determined, her hands moving steadily over the controls. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped into the room. "Clara," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She turned, startled, then froze when she saw him. For a moment, disbelief flickered across her face. Then recognition dawned, and she stood abruptly. "Daniel," she asked, her voice trembling. "Is it really you?" "It's me," he confirmed, stepping closer. "We're here to get you out." Before Clara could respond, alarms blared throughout the palace. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in a harsh crimson glow. Someone had discovered their presence. "Go," Rachel urged from the doorway, her weapon drawn. "We don't have much time." Clara grabbed a data tablet from the table, stuffing it into her bag. "We need to find the core resonator," she said urgently. "It's in the Imperial Vault. This way." The group followed her down a series of twisting corridors, dodging patrols and narrowly avoiding detection. The vault was located deep beneath the palace, accessible only through a heavily guarded door. Clara worked quickly, entering a sequence of codes into the control panel. Behind them, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. "Hurry," Daniel hissed. With a final beep, the door slid open. Inside, the core resonator sat atop a pedestal, its surface pulsing with a faint blue light. Rachel rushed forward, attaching a small explosive device to its base. "This will disable it," she explained, setting the timer. "But we need to get out of here before it blows." As they turned to leave, Varric appeared in the doorway, blocking their path. His expression was unreadable, his glowing eyes fixed on Clara. "You've made your choice," he said quietly. "Now make sure it counts." For a moment, no one moved. Then Clara stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "Thank you," she said simply. Varric nodded once and stepped aside, allowing them to pass. They sprinted through the corridors, the sound of explosions echoing behind them as the core resonator detonated. Smoke filled the air, and the ground shook violently, but they pressed on, driven by sheer determination. Reaching the exit, they burst into the open air just as their ship descended to meet them. Bullets whizzed past as Krylos guards gave chase, but the team climbed aboard, slamming the hatch shut behind them. As the ship lifted off, Daniel glanced back at Clara, who was breathing heavily but smiling faintly. Against all odds, they had done it. They were free. But the fight was far from over. The ship roared through the atmosphere of Krylos Prime, its engines straining as it climbed higher into the sky. Inside, the team held their breath, bracing themselves for pursuit. Clara clutched the data tablet tightly to her chest, her knuckles white from the effort. The adrenaline coursing through her veins made it hard to think clearly, but one thing was certain. They weren't safe yet. Behind them, the Imperial Palace was in chaos. Flames licked at the edges of the structure, and plumes of black smoke billowed into the air. The destruction of the core resonator had triggered a chain reaction, crippling key systems throughout the facility. Alarms blared across the city, and Krylos soldiers scrambled to respond to the breach. It wouldn't take long for Zorith AX to realize what had happened, and who was responsible. As the ship broke free of the planet's gravity, Daniel turned to Clara, his voice urgent. "Did you get everything we need?" Clara nodded, holding up the tablet. "Blueprints, schematics, everything about the Oblivion Array. If Rachel can analyze this, we might be able to shut it down permanently." Rachel, seated at the controls, glanced over her shoulder. "I'll start working on it as soon as we're clear," she said, her tone grim but focused. "But we've got bigger problems." She pointed to the viewport, where several Krylos warships were emerging from orbit, their weapons already charging. "Hold on," Daniel shouted, gripping the pilot's console as he maneuvered the ship into evasive action. The Krylos vessels opened fire, sending streaks of energy slicing through space. The small craft shuddered violently under the impact of near misses, throwing everyone off balance. Clara stumbled into a wall, clutching it for support as alarms blared inside the cockpit. "We're not going to outrun them," Rachel yelled, frantically adjusting the ship's trajectory. "They're too fast." Daniel gritted his teeth, his mind racing. "We need a distraction, something to buy us time." Clara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Let me talk to them." Everyone froze, staring at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Are you serious?" Daniel asked, incredulous. "They'll tear us apart." "No," Clara insisted, shaking her head. "If I can reach Zorath directly, I might be able to stall them. He's arrogant. He won't pass up the chance to gloat." After a tense moment, Daniel reluctantly agreed. "Fine, but make it quick." Clara activated the communication system, her hand steady despite the danger. When Zorath's cold, resonant voice crackled over the speakers, she straightened her posture, meeting the screen with a fearless gaze. "Emperor Zorath," she began, her voice calm but firm, "you have underestimated humanity. We may be outnumbered and outgunned, but we will never stop fighting. Destroying us won't bring you peace. It will only fuel our resolve." There was a pause, followed by a low, rumbling laugh. "You dare challenge me, little human?" Zorath sneered. "Your defiance is amusing, but futile. Surrender now, or face annihilation." Clara's jaw tightened. "Annihilate us, and you'll lose more than just Earth. You'll lose any hope of ruling without resistance. Your empire thrives on fear, but fear is a fragile foundation. How long do you think your people will follow you when they see how easily rebellion spreads?" Zorath's glowing eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. For a moment, the line went silent. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke again. "You are either brave or foolish, Clara Bennett. Either way, your fate is sealed." Before he could cut the transmission, Clara leaned closer to the screen. "History remembers those who stand against tyranny, Zorath, not those who enforce it. Mark my words, your reign will end." The connection terminated abruptly, leaving the cabin in tense silence. Outside, the Krylos ships continued their relentless pursuit, closing in on all sides. Just as it seemed escape was impossible, Rachel spotted an opening, a narrow asteroid field nearby that could provide cover. "Hold on," she shouted, steering the ship toward the jagged rocks. They weaved through the debris at breakneck speed, the larger Krylos vessels unable to follow without risking collision. One by one, the enemy ships fell behind until finally they were alone in the vastness of space. As the immediate threat faded, exhaustion settled over the group. Clara sank into a seat, her body trembling with relief. They had escaped, for now, but the fight was far from over. Still, as she looked around at the faces of her rescuers, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Humanity wasn't defeated yet, and neither was she. Back on Earth, the Resistance worked tirelessly to turn Clara's stolen data into a weapon against the Krylos. Rachel Monroe spent hours hunched over her laptop, deciphering the alien schematics and cross-referencing them with Earth's limited technology. The team gathered around her in the bunker, their faces tense but hopeful. Every breakthrough brought them one step closer to disabling the Oblivion Array and ensuring the Krylos couldn't rebuild it. Clara joined Rachel, offering insights from her time working under Zorath. "The array runs on a frequency that disrupts biological systems," she explained, pointing to a series of equations on the screen. "If we can reverse engineer that frequency, we might be able to create a countermeasure, a pulse that neutralizes its effects." Rachel nodded, typing furiously as she adjusted the calculations. "It's risky," she admitted. "If we get it wrong, the pulse could destabilize our own systems instead. But if we get it right—" She didn't finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood what was at stake. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter prepared for the final battle. Intelligence reports indicated that the Krylos fleet was regrouping near Earth's orbit, preparing to launch the Oblivion Array once repairs were complete. Time was running out. The Resistance had managed to rally survivors from across the globe, cobbling together a makeshift fleet of ships salvaged from old military bases and abandoned colonies. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "We're outnumbered," Daniel said during a strategy meeting, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "But we got something they don't. Desperation. They think they've already won, but we know better. We fight for every inch of this planet, and we don't stop until they're gone." The plan was simple. Deploy the countermeasure pulse from a central ship while the rest of the fleet engaged the Krylos forces. It was a suicide mission. The ship carrying the pulse would likely be destroyed in the process, but someone had to do it. Without hesitation, Daniel volunteered himself. "I started this fight," he said firmly. "I'll finish it." Clara stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Not alone," she said. "You saved me, Daniel. Now I'm saving you. And everyone else." The two argued briefly, but Daniel eventually relented. Together, they finalized the details, knowing there was no guarantee either of them would survive. As the day of the battle approached, the bunker buzzed with nervous energy. Weapons were checked, ships were fueled, and goodbyes were exchanged. No one spoke of failure. They couldn't afford to. When the Krylos fleet arrived, Earth's skies lit up with streaks of fire and light. The resistance ships launched in waves, swarming the enemy vessels like insects attacking a predator. Explosions erupted across the horizon as both sides clashed in a desperate struggle for survival. Amidst the chaos, Daniel and Clara piloted the central ship toward the heart of the Krylos formation, dodging enemy fire as they activated the pulse device. "Ready?" Daniel asked, gripping the controls tightly. Clara took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the console. "Ready." With a final push, they unleashed the pulse, a blinding wave of energy rippling outward. The Oblivion Array sputtered and died, its systems overwhelmed by the countermeasure. Cheers erupted from the resistance fleet as the tide of the battle began to shift. But victory came at a cost. Their ship was hit moments later, engulfed in flames as it plummeted toward Earth. From the ground, Rachel watched the fiery descent, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, silence fell over the battlefield. Then, against all odds, a faint signal crackled through the comms. "We're okay." Daniel's voice came through, weak but alive. Mission accomplished. The war wasn't over, but humanity had struck a devastating blow. And for the first time in months, hope burned bright in the hearts of those who refused to give up. The aftermath of the battle left Earth scared but alive. Smoke hung heavy in the air, and the ground was littered with the wreckage of ships, both human and Krylos. Survivors emerged from bunkers and hidden shelters, their faces pale but determined. The resistance had won a crucial victory, but the cost was etched into every crater and burned-out building. Despite the destruction, there was a sense of quiet triumph. Humanity had stood its ground, and for the first time, the Krylos Dominion had been forced to retreat. Daniel Carter and Clara Bennett were hailed as heroes when they returned to the bunker, limping but alive after ejecting from their damaged ship at the last moment. Their survival felt like a miracle, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope could prevail. Clara immediately went to work analyzing the data recovered from the pulse device, ensuring it could be replicated if the Krylos tried again. Her hands moved quickly over the keyboard, her focus unshakable despite her exhaustion. Rachel Monroe joined her, reviewing the schematics with a critical eye. "This changes everything," Rachel said softly, looking up from the screen. "If we can mass-produce this countermeasure, we might have a real chance to push them out of our solar system." Clara nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "And not just for us. For every world they've conquered. If we can share this technology with other species, we can unite against them." Word spread quickly among the resistance fighters, sparking a new wave of determination. Survivors from across the globe began working together, pooling resources and knowledge to rebuild what had been lost. Factories were repurposed to create weapons and defensive systems based on Clara's designs. Communication networks were established to reach enslaved populations within the Krylos Empire, offering them support and a path to freedom. In the weeks that followed, Clara found herself standing before a group of survivors, addressing them for the first time. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but her words carried strength. "We've suffered greatly, but we're still here," she said, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "The Krylos thought they could break us, but they underestimated who we are. We're resilient, we're united, and most importantly, we're free." Her speech ignited a fire in those who heard it. Resistance cells sprang up not only on Earth, but also on distant planets where oppressed species rose up against their Krylos overlords. Messages of solidarity poured in, each one a testament to humanity's courage and ingenuity. For the first time, the Krylos Dominion faced an enemy it couldn't crush, a coalition of worlds fighting for justice. As the months passed, Daniel stood on a hill overlooking what remained of New York City. The skyline was jagged and broken, but crews worked tirelessly to clear debris and begin reconstruction. He thought about how far they'd come, from the chaos of invasion to the hope of liberation. It wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would be long, but they had taken the first step toward reclaiming their future. Behind him, Clara approached, carrying a tablet filled with updated plans. "Earth isn't the end," she said, handing it to him. "It's the beginning. Together, we can build something better, not just for us, but for everyone." Daniel looked at her, then back at the horizon. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was a new dawn, not just for Earth, but for all who dared to dream of freedom. And though challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, armed with courage, unity, and an unyielding belief in a brighter tomorrow.